You're gonna be hacking in the background. No. I want to get a sweater though.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Indie Memphis Film Festival. My name is Kayla Myers, and I'm a programmer here at Indie Memphis. And I'm so excited to be having this conversation with Elegance Bratton, the director of Pier KIds. So glad to have you here. A little bit of an introduction into Elegance. Elegance is a filmmaker and photographer whose films have been at Sundance, the American Black Film Festival, and Outfest. He was an executive producer / creator of Viceland's series My House. And tonight I have the honor of getting to talk with him about his feature-length documentary, Pier KIds. So I think to kind of start off, you've talked a little bit in other Q&As about how your motivation for the film came from your own experience with homelessness. And then there's the other thing that I found really interesting about how Crystal made it clear to you that you couldn't film her until you became friends, until you were friends. And so I just wanted to hear first sort of how did you develop that relationship with her and some of the other people who were featured in your film, and sort of how did you come to the decision that you wanted to film and make a movie?
Well, now you make me realize I need to say things I haven't said before. But thank you for such good research, and thank you so much for programming the film, taking the time to watch it, and all the staff that make it possible. Thank you all. So I'll start with Crystal and our friendship. Like, I'm the type of person where if I feel like I know you without saying a word, then pretty much we're going to be friends. Yeah. So I think the way that Crystal and I built the trust was like, first of all, when I started making this movie, everyone thought I was making like Love and Hip Hop, like the gay Love and Hip Hop or something. They thought I was working. They literally would call me cameraman, hey, VH1 man, you know? And so people would like throw drinks at each other and like fight to try to get on camera. And I would always be like, well, thank you for fighting, but I'm not interested in filming you. I mean, unless you're someone that's in the movie that's fighting, I'm not interested in seeing the community fight. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of thing where like maybe other camera crews and other artists were in the community making stuff that was, they didn't have the same instincts or kind of, I guess, ethical meter that I had. And I think over time, Crystal and the people on the Pier KIds seeing how I operated, right? The things that I was interested in talking about and seeing, because like the thing is, any conversation I have in this film, trust and believe, the play-by-play was repeated after the camera went off and these kids went about their night and went about their business. So I think I started to gain a reputation in the community for being a different type of artist than perhaps had normally come to chronicle, to witness their existence. And how did I come across the idea to make the film? So, you know, often I talk about being at Columbia University, and that's all, you know, relevant. However, the thing about Columbia that really kicked into me was when I got there, I actually saw, you know, wealth, capital, being around people who have actual capital, right? Like, I remember as a kid, I would think we had, if we got like a Christmas bonus or my mom managed to work a few extra hours a week, then our lives would materially improve and you think you'd have money. And I didn't realize that I didn't have money until I went to Columbia. I was like, oh, this is what money is. This is what generational wealth is. Mm-hmm. When I got in that space, you know, those kids were already, you know, 17, 18, 19 years old, so skilled at wielding their privilege to beget more access and privilege. It was second nature to them. And I was left there to kind of think about, you know, well, what is my capital? What is my thing that I have that I can use to make a way in the world? And I realized that my life experience was that, and that a meaningful part of any great artist is the transformation of one's life experience into meaning for someone else, right? So I was like, okay, what has my life been up to this point? I was homeless for a bunch of years. My family doesn't accept my sexuality. And then as I started making Pier Kids, it all started to kind of like eureka moment after eureka moment, where it became clear to me that this film was a way for me to kind of codify that life experience that I have into something that someone else could gain meaning from. So once I committed to that, I was like, okay, now it's time to be a filmmaker. I need to make this movie so that way I have something tangible out of my life that could be, given to others, and that would be my way to make a way.
Yeah, that's being able to have like a tangible piece of something that really encapsulates your experience. I feel like that's such a vital thing for so many of us, especially as artists. And I think that kind of really segues really nicely into something that I was thinking about throughout watching Peer Kids, is sort of this kind of negotiation of space in public space, and who gets to actually be present in public in any sort of space. And in particular, I found it really interesting. There's this moment later, I think it's like towards the middle of the film or towards the end, where there's this shot of people on the grass, like hanging out and sort of sunbathing on the pier. And then the clip right after it is we're back at night at the pier. There's this like police car in the right of the frame. And it just really, for me, was just a really stark representation of sort of who gets to navigate space freely. And so I'm just really curious about your thoughts on that, and sort of how did that impact you while you were filming and sort of bringing your camera in spaces. And just, I think there's a general sort of sense of kind of resistance and like assertion of space with everyone who's in the film. And so I'd also just love to hear you sort of talk about that as well.
Sure. Well, it kind of, again, goes back to undergrad. It goes back to Columbia, because I was taking this great class with Dr. Carla Shedd, who's an incredible contemporary sociologist focused on the criminal justice system as it relates to Black youth, juveniles. So her class was called Race, Space, and Urban America. So yeah, so we spent a lot of time in that class thinking about public space for urban America, and particularly this thing that kind of really informed Peer Kids is the sociologist called Jane Jacobs. She had this idea of, it's called broken windows theory. So basically, any gentrifying city, right? Whether that be Memphis, New York City, Louisville, right? They have this idea that in order to, first of all, build the wealth, to build the worth of the property, that you have to fix all the broken windows, right? And then once you fixed all the broken windows, now you're supposed to mobilize the police force, the systems, the transactional exchange of land, right? All of this was to be mobilized around keeping those windows unbroken and building new non-broken windows. So that you have to then look out for quality of life crimes. So because people who commit quality of life crimes are more likely to break windows. I mean, I'm really paraphrasing this in a certain kind of way, but that is to say that in a neighborhood like the West Village of New York City, that gentrification is about maintaining property value, that police are employed not to protect building, or not to protect people, but to protect property, to protect buildings. So if you are a person or from a group of people that is deemed as being likely to be, breaking a window, then you are a broken window. You're a living, breathing problem, right? And the police are now encouraged to fix you by eliminating you from space. So that gentrification is a code word for ethnic cleansing, right? So, so when navigating public space, these homeless queer youth, by virtue of being poor and Black, they're not explicitly illegal, but they're enough of a threat to the maintenance and the building of wealth, right, and capital, that they are treated as if illegality and criminality just flows from them, right? It's like a first strike mentality around policing. You may not have done anything tonight, but you probably did something last week, and you'll probably do something next week. So therefore, I'm just gonna make you walk back and forth like that. That's a thing. This film, there's a way that the shoreline inspires this film to me, in that if you're in New York, the pier, the water part of this movie, is at the end of the street. The beginning of the street is where the pizza place is. In New York after 9/11, it was illegal for more than two people to be on any street corner at any time. So imagine, because they think that if there's a group, that the next 9/11 might happen, right? And then imagine what it is to be a Black queer kid who is absolutely requiring the outdoors in order to just find community and all of its meanings. You know, like Deshaun says, this is a party, this is a living room, this is a bedroom, this public space is functioning a lot of different ways for young people who, even if they were not necessarily rejected by their families, they're still young. They don't necessarily make the money to go and eat in the restaurant that's on Christopher Street or buy clothes from the clothing store on Christopher Street, but they have enough money to buy some weed, roll it with their friends, and smoke it outside, you know? So right then and there, their organic, they're who they are as young people runs counter to the ruling narrative of gentrification. So there's this battle that happens. And on one side, you have a police force that has, like, I think they've gotten something like $100 billion in the last 25 years, and a community of Black queer homeless youth who might have a couple $100 between them in a night. So it creates these battles that occur nightly. And when you speak about resistance, these folks know that Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, two trans women of color, are the reason why the pier is supposed to be safe for them. There's rainbow flags on every building. You know what I mean? This is the gay district. So to them, it's like, well, if my ancestors fought for me to be here, then I should be allowed to be here. And you know what? I'm just gonna be here. I'm not going anywhere. You know, and I'm really, really inspired by that. I really find that's the spirit of resistance, is the spirit of the film, is to say, I refuse to disappear. I refuse to let you forget about me, right? As long as I'm out here in public, everyone knows what I'm going through. And you all have to decide to do something about it or not. And I really, really admire that about these young people in this film.
Yeah, I really, really admire it too, and found it to be the thing that, like, I've seen Pier KIds twice now, and that has really been the thing that has given me the most hope and sort of revitalized me every time I feel like I've watched it. And you've already hit on gentrification, which is a question that I was kind of asked, that I was going to ask sort of separately, but sort of is, of course, involved in space. But I think something that's really interesting is thinking about the legacy of Christopher Street, which you've already sort of hit on. And I was just really curious, sort of, Deshaun says something earlier on in the film where he says, we explore ourselves as well as relationships. It's the humor and the unifying effect of the pier versus what Christopher Street itself is. And so I'm just curious sort of about, again, the sort of gentrification of Christopher Street, and in addition to sort of its legacy as the birthplace of the queer rights movement, but sort of how, like you said, like these trans and queer youth of color, especially these Black trans and queer youth of color, have had to continue to assert this space that should be for them, but is not. So I wanted to sort of hear you talk about that and sort of the legacy of, like, Christopher Street and what it kind of looks like now, because I've only been to New York once, but I did end up going to Christopher Street the one time that I've been there, and it was just very interesting for me to see sort of like the monument, and then you have like the big gay ice cream shop really close, but it it's just a very interesting space to be in. It was an interesting space for me to be in as a queer person. And so I just kind of wanted to hear you talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, Big Gay Ice Cream, right?
Yeah.
It's all white. It's like literally alabaster statues. Like, so you would never think that one of those statues was a Puerto Rican trans woman or a Black trans woman, right? Yeah, the thing is like this film exists because when I was a kid getting kicked out of my house for being gay, I felt like the gay rights movement had abandoned me and the civil rights movement had abandoned me. Like it wasn't until I came back to my first college, back to undergrad, when I got into queer studies and I got into Black studies, I all of a sudden had all these terms and all of this way of understanding my life story and my life condition, which was, liberating for sure, but equally infuriating because, this whole time, if I'd known this, maybe if my mother had seen this on a TV show, or if, if ACT UP had more Black leadership and they ended up in Essence and on Oprah, then maybe my mother would have heard about some of this stuff and we would have had some language with which to try to understand one another better. So, Pier KIds exist to bring light to that blind spot in a colorblind society where race, sexuality, and class conspire to create a harsh life outcome that is going to be harsh regardless of whoever you vote for, Trump, or Biden, or at that time, Obama or McCain, right? It didn't really matter because at the end of the day, there is no language, there is no continuity. The civil rights movement in its acquiescence to the Black church automatically puts queer people of color into the back seat because half of the people in the congregation think that you're an abomination, right? And then the other half are so concerned with what white folks think of them that they don't want to be embarrassed or like have someone like you represent them so that maybe they can have more access. And then once I get up there, I'm going to get you in there, and that never happens, right? And then on the gay side of it, there's this, what I call like this Jane Goodall approach. We're so like you. We're gay, we want to marry, we want to have kids, we want to buy houses, we want to do everything you want to do. And that's why we should have our rights, because we're like you. We're not 6'4" Black trans women. We're not, bangy, loudmouth Puerto Rican kids drinking in the open air. We're stockbrokers, we're lawyers, we're doctors, we're professionals. And it's not to say that I don't appreciate, obviously I'm married to, I have a wonderful husband, so I appreciate this work that's been done to make that possible. But at the same time, that what makes it possible is people like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. What makes it possible is the family that they formed. Marsha was Sylvia's gay mother. They were both homeless, both trans. And these two people and the communities they represent, they have the least to lose and the most to gain. And to think that, cops today, half of these people we see getting strangled in the street are living in like a nebulous economic situation that could be considered working class, homeless, it's something. I don't want to take away the racial component of this police brutality moment that we're in, but there's definitely a very clear class component to it. These are folks who the economy is not benefiting them, and it leaves them exposed because it's not. Eric Garner has to sell cigarettes on the side of the street in order to survive and feed his family, and that's the key interaction that ends his life. So when you think about Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, two homeless people, and their community who said, no, we'll be the ones to fight back first. Those cops if they were kicking Black people's asses today, imagine what they were doing in 1969. And to think that these brave folks for whom their life is literally on the line, that the people who look most like them 50 years later have to either get HIV or remain homeless, right? This is a critique of both of those movements. And that's kind of where I'm coming from when it comes to this notion of like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson's legacy. There is no gay rights movement anymore unless we deal with this issue of queer and trans homeless youth of color and queer and trans homeless youth overall. 50% of the homeless people in America are queer kids. Half of them are of color. So this is an issue that is affecting everybody. And it is the gay rights movement. If we don't do it, if the queer people don't do it for our kids, who else is going to do it for us? So I'm hoping that Pier KIds serves as a call to arms to those who watch it, and maybe a new generation of activists and thinkers and challengers are coming, and they seem to be on their way, right? Mm-hmm. To address this issue once and for all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that you bring up in terms of just kind of sometimes the trap of visibility and people being very tied into thinking about visibility and representation. And it's like, that is good and that is positive, but it's also like, it sort of just removes us thinking about those of us who are working class and who are impacted by all of this in various different ways and in various different proximities to, as you mentioned earlier, capital, and being able to navigate those spaces in an economic fashion. And I think that sort of kind of segues a little bit into another question that I wanted to ask you. There's a really interesting moment that happens. I've been calling this person Financial District Man in my head and notes, where that conversation you kind of have with him, I found really interesting, and just sort of these little sprinkles of moments to kind of come back to sort of thinking about resistance in space, where you just have your camera on white people who are just staring, like the man in the truck, the people who are in the car during the Pride Parade and are so scandalized by the fact that people are celebrating in the streets at night. And so I just wanted to hear from you about that choice to include that scene. And I think it also really places the film in a particular time and place, because Obama is president in the moment that scene happens. And there's a conversation there.
Get the cat out here, babe. Sorry.
You're fine.
Wake her up and put her in the kitchen now, because there's an issue. And put the food away too. Sorry.
You're totally fine. We're all at home. It's okay. Yeah. So I'm just really curious about why having that scene be in the film, and sort of what you're thinking, what you were thinking of in terms of including it, and just kind of your camera acting as sort of an act of resistance throughout the film.
Well, for me, including that scene was really, really important, because I come from a background in being my background. I feel like a lot of times when I try to my life, when I've tried to express, even to the most progressive white friends that I have, or straight friends that I have, the kind of intensity or difficulties I face within my intersectionality, that they require some sort of evidence, whether that's I'm at a job and you say, well, I feel like you did A, B, C, and D. And then they're like, well, prove it. Tell me what exactly I did and how it happened and da 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 da, right? Mm-hmm. And that's all well and good. You should be able to do that. However, when it comes to how these kids are operating in this public space, I feel like there needed to be evidence. I think people need to actually visualize and see what is happening to these kids. So when this financial district guy shows up, it's one of them things where it's like, I could chase you away because you're interrupting my interview. Mm-hmm. Or maybe the fact that you're interrupting my interview is kind of like the thesis of this film. Maybe that's what this film is all about. This film is about the presumed invisibility of queer people of color, and how that invisibility makes our lives less likely to be lived fully. So I wanted to include their point of view, one, because it's a little funny. And I think having a laugh or two in a movie like this is a good thing to have, but two, because I wanted to give the audience at home an opportunity to see themselves perhaps, or see people that they know. And now they know that when you're outside of the bubble of having to be politically correct, maybe there's someone in your life that reminds you of this guy. And maybe in that moment where their guard is down, they'll be able to step in and be like, hey, have you ever thought about this before? Which is what I did. I just wanted to ask him, I didn't want to accuse him of anything, but I just wanted to invite him to think differently. Sorry.
No, yeah. You do it really beautifully. It's so incredible. And you're right. It is a great moment of laughter, because it's like, I feel like many people and myself have experienced that many times. So I'm so glad that it's included. I'll ask you a couple more questions, but I want to remind folks who are watching that if you have any questions for Elegance, you can send them in the chat box and they'll be forwarded to me, whether you're on YouTube or Eventive or Facebook. Feel free to send your questions. Another sort of element of this throughout is, of course, sort of the found family and the community that they create with each other. And then sort of how Crystal becomes a mother and has all of these children, and later on, like you ask her brother about, like, you tell her brother about like how many children she has, and that she is a mother, and that she sort of is already in this role. And so I just kind of wanted to hear from you sort of about what it was like witnessing sort of Crystal being a mother to others, especially as she sort of was the child of someone herself, and sort of have that sort of lineage kind of developed as you were filming throughout the years.
I think a lot of, and rightfully so, a lot of ink has been spilled this year talking about Black Lives Matter, Black trans lives matter. However, I don't think the news media is geared towards the nuance of why they matter, right? I mean, and they matter because they matter, yes. However, whenever we read these headlines of like, people who are being killed in the streets for who they are, what we're not really getting is the people who are left behind. And Black trans women, for myself and for just about everyone in the film, they're like, there's this another scene where a woman talks about seeing a young kid kind of jump off the pier and kill themselves. And the thing is, she was upset because she wasn't Tay-Tay, because she wasn't able to jump in and save him like she had done the first time. And that's kind of the way I see Black trans women, is that they are the ones jumping into the choppy water and pulling people out who otherwise would be swept away. And showing Crystal with her family, I think, was important for the audience to see, for those who are not from this lifestyle, to see that there's all of these vital, life-saving interactions that occur, harm-preventing interactions that occur from these people that you might think are disposable. Mm-hmm. And so if Crystal is gone, who is going to be the one to teach Michelle how to budget her money and keep a roof over her head, and who's going to feed this one and feed that one? And then seeing Crystal with her mother, I realized after about a year of filming that I had been talking to Crystal, and we kind of hit another rut. And I realized she had all these kids. And I'm like, where do you learn this from? Tell me about your mom. And then she started talking about her mom. And I was like, oh, we should go see your mom. So it's important for me to show where Crystal gets it from, that it's Black cis women, that are teaching all of us the survival strategies that we've utilized to get this far, so that there's a little less foreignness around it, right? Like, I think a lot of times moms, they think they have, like Joelle, Crystal's mother, says in the thing, I gave birth to a son. I want my son, and they think because that happened that everything from childhood is just mute. And that's not, there's all this stuff you teach them that they're using to live. So I wanted to show moms like Joelle, who may not get to see the Crystals in their lives grow up, that there's some good being passed down from mother to daughter.
Yeah, I think mentioning Crystal's mom and her family makes me think a lot about her relationship with her siblings and seeing sort of that solidarity with your siblings. And this isn't an experience that all sort of queer and trans people share, but I feel like the solidarity of siblings is something that isn't always as focused on as much, or something that we talk about a lot, about how family members like your siblings can sometimes be the first person who you feel comfortable sharing about who you are. May not always be, that doesn't always happen. But I think that's a really interesting element of their relationship, is seeing how her siblings sort of embrace her in comparison to her aunt and her mom, which kind of also makes me think about sort of looking at, you've kind of already mentioned this earlier, but the church and Deshawn and Crystal sort of relationship with the church and their connections to it. It's something that I found really interesting, because I feel like for many of us, we're not as connected to it anymore, especially once we come out and everything. But Deshawn still sort of, he goes to church and he has this relationship with church. And so I kind of wanted to hear you talk about that and what it was like filming with him. And also sort of there's this really beautiful moment where Crystal is singing with her family,
Yeah.
singing a song together with them. And it's like, this is just kind of a really interesting illustration of that tension that we all kind of have, of like your family wanting you to change yourself and change your presentation when you're around them, but still wanting to say they love you and they support you. So just kind of wanted to hear from you talking about that.
Yeah, I think it's important to show. I mean, for me, like I'm a spiritual person. I'm not quite as religious as Crystal is, but I'm highly spiritual and I do believe in God and I have a relationship with God. And I think that, again, the idea of evidence, right? That there's a lot of people in this country, especially now, they want to reverse gay marriage and
Mhm.
abortion, do all these things, and they assume that because you live a certain type of lifestyle that you are somehow exiled from the possibility of being in the kingdom of God. And that's not true. It's not true in the Bible either. You know what I mean? It's never been true. So I think that by showing Crystal that this nuance of her, and really, that's kind of like the topical way, but from a character perspective, I just think it's fascinating. Crystal has every reason to burn every Bible if she wanted to, because those Bibles have been used as a weapon against her. And she doesn't. She actually sees the message in it and the love in Christianity, and that's really what she's all about, is in her belief system showing, God's love. And I think it's a challenge to the people who believe in this, who watch it. You think, do you think that Crystal is able to be an expression of the love of your savior? And if so, then you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of expression of love are you
Mm.
to exclude her? At least that's what I hope is happening when they watch the film.
Yeah, I'll ask you one more question and then we have a couple questions from the audience. Something that I really wanted to give space to while having this conversation with you is the people that you list in loving memory at the end of the film. And so I just wanted to give space to that and have us have sort of a moment to recognize those people and why you chose those people in particular. One of those names is Hector Extravaganza. And so I just wanted to hear from you about that, but also just have us to have a space to sort of honor them and their contribution and why you chose them in particular to sort of honor at the end of the film.
Well, Hector is my gay grandfather.
Mm.
My gay mother is Brenda Milan, and that's her gay father. I did a movie called Walk For Me, a short film that Indie Memphis didn't program, but it's fine.
I wasn't.
We're cool. But in that film, Hector he's in it. He's playing one of the judges. The film takes place at a ball. Hector's at the ball judging, and Hector has always been one of those people that I considered Hector to be a mentor of mine. Hector would always take me to the side at the function just talk to me about, well, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be when you grow up? What is this camera that you got the camera every week, don't you? What are you doing with it? Why? Who are you going to be? And I, and at first it was kind of a little awkward because I was like, man, who is this guy? Why is he talking to me like this? But then after a while, as we got to know each other, I realized that, Hector really he considered me a part of the community, and he has a hand in so many people. So many of the names that you know from ballroom have come through Hector Extravaganza. So when he passed a couple of years ago, that was really upsetting to me because I had a lot of love for him, and I had plans to do projects with Hector, and we talk on the phone often, and it made me sad. And then for the other names that are in there, for Cheetah and so many of these kids, the lifestyle that they leave, Casper, the lifestyle they leave, this is an at-risk lifestyle. You're exposed to a great deal of risk because you live outside. And sure, what you do outside plays into it, but the fact that you're outside, you could be, a Girl Scout. And if you spend 24 hours a day on the street, you are exposed to more danger than someone who has a place to go to. And unfortunately, myself included, I was on those piers when I was that age. And there's a lot of people that I have gone from this earth who I spent meaningful time with. And I don't have nothing of them to show. So I wanted to make the film into a living memorial for all of those people whose names will never get said, and who nonetheless made this world safer for queer people like us, and Cheetah, he passed from AIDS in 15, and this is at a time when we were talking about AIDS no longer being a life-threatening illness, right? Because of protease inhibitors. Mm-hmm. So the fact that this young Black man, Afro-Latin man, dies of HIV and AIDS in 2015, people should know that that's still happening, and that we need to do. Oh, close the door, babe. Don't let her in there. She got to get to work. But yeah, this needs to be talked about. We need to make space. We need to. When you live a life like that, things happen so fast. I went from 16 to 30 like that. And all of these people, all these interactions, all these life-changing events occurred, and there's no evidence, there's no proof. So I wanted to make this film into that for everyone. So that way, if you ever just want to think about that person that you've lost, you can watch this movie and have that memorial.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and that's really beautiful. And I'm so glad that you included that detail. One of the first questions from the audience is, were there any challenges with Crystal's birth family while you were filming?
There were challenges in the sense of like what you see in the movie. It was a lot more of that, of being in very just obtuse types of conversations where people are kind of pre-programmed to invalidate her. And me being her friend and wanting to if I didn't have a camera with me, there may have been arguments. But because I had a camera with me, I had a responsibility to tell the truth of what was happening. So there was a lot of stuff like that. And then I remember one time I was with her, and her cousin referred to her having the same virus that I had. And I was like, well, what virus is that? And he was like, the gay virus. Mm-hmm. And you've got the latent version of it because you're not a drag queen yet. And she's got the full-blown version of it because she's trans. And I was just, and you just want to just read them. You just want to no, that's wrong. You can't say that. But I couldn't do that because I had to tell his story. And I think what I hope people get from that part of the film of seeing her family is this idea I've been really trying to meditate on, which is radical empathy, trying very, very hard to put yourself in the shoes of another, even someone that you disagree with, even though that might even hurt you a little bit when you can, because sometimes I cannot do it, and that's okay not to be able to do it. But Crystal, I think, gives us a master class in radical empathy, and her ability to be like, I'm going to reach you by hearing you is something I think in this political moment, I wish the presidents debating did that.
Mm-hmm.
We might actually learn something from these debates if they did that.
Yeah. Another question is something that we were talking about before we started, is what are you working on now?
All right. I am in post-production on my next feature documentary. It's called Hellfighter, the story of James Reese Europe. James Reese Europe is one of the most important Black composers of the early 20th century. He rose to fame making crossover hits, taking the ragtime of the Black ghettos and turning it into pop hits that were played by high society. He became one of the most famous men in New York, and then decided that that wasn't enough, that even though he was famous, he was still Black. As long as his brothers and sisters had to live a degraded life, then he had a responsibility to use his stature to make it better. So he joined the military and became a part of a regiment of Black troops who were the first to fight in a world war. And he was the first Black soldier to actually engage in combat for the United States. So the movie is, like I said, it's called Hellfighter, and we're almost halfway done with it, which I'm excited about. And I'm also in pre-production for my feature fiction debut, The Inspection, a story about a homeless man who joins the Marine Corps to change his life, but then has to conceal his attraction to his drill instructor to survive boot camp. And I've got many other projects I'm working on as well that will be coming out in the next year or so. So I'm somehow through this pandemic, I've stayed employed. So I'm very grateful.
Yes, we love to hear that. I'm so excited to see all of those projects. I want to remind everyone, if you want to ask any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat and they'll forward those to me. And I'll ask you one more question. I'm just kind of curious on sort of an update on the people, everyone, Crystal, Deshawn, Jada, sort of, if you have updates on anyone that you're like willing and comfortable to share, I'd love to hear those.
Crystal is happily married with her husband in Pennsylvania. She has a job, she has a home, she's living around her brothers and her nieces and nephews. So she's wrapped up in family and God. So she's very happy with that. Deshawn, I believe, may still be incarcerated. He was incarcerated. I've continually extended myself as a mentor, and I hope that he'll reach out to me when that time comes. You said Jada. Jada, I'm not too sure about. I don't know what Jada's up to. I hope Jada's doing good though. Lexi and Claudia are figuring it out. They are in and out of trouble, unfortunately, but they're still amazing people. And overall, I mean, this movie was shot between 2011 and 2016. So people have grown up, like Daniela Carter, who's in the movie, Crystal's daughter, that she takes to get her nails done. She's now a producer of content, various kind of web videos and short films and things like that. And was on the T Word with Laverne Cox, and she's friends with Janet Mock, and she's fabulous, so she's living that life. So they're many of them are doing great, and many of them are still struggling. And I think, this movie is to say, like, for some of us, we're lucky enough to grow up and grow off of the pier. And for some of us, it does not happen. You stay in that life until you are not alive anymore. So I hope that this film inspires people to continually go back for people, make sure that folks are okay.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, a good place to sort of end the conversation, is going back for people and lifting them up and ensuring that those of us can continue having futures and lives that are full and whole. So Elegance, I just want to say thank you so much for your film, for this conversation and being here tonight. I cannot say how glad I'm that I am that I got to have this conversation with you.
I'm so excited to have the conversation with you as well. And thank you, Indie Memphis. And for all the people out there watching, donate to your local film festival. Indie Memphis is thebomb.com. I feel like I'm officially on the map playing it. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Just want to remind you about a couple events that are happening tomorrow. Tomorrow we have our first sort of live grounding event where we're showing Christopher Yogi's A Still Place. And then following that, we have an indie talk on embodiment in digital spaces, sort of connected to his film and sort of how we sort of navigating this space as we're all sort of digitally connecting now. So thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Bye, everybody.